Well, I want to say thank you and welcome to the Artist Talk for Witchgrass, a exhibition at Tempest, curated by Chris Baker and 𝙒𝙗𝙏𝘾𝙃𝙙𝘏. It is featuring 5 fantastic artists, of which you can see the work in real time. And we're so happy that you're here to learn more about individual practices and some of the themes that emerged about the work. It was initially inspired by a poem by 𝙒𝙗𝙏𝘾𝙃𝙀 called Witchgrass, which Stephanie is going to read for us right now.
Witchgrass by 𝙒𝙗𝙏𝙀𝙀. Something comes into the world unwelcome, calling disorder, disorder. If you hate me so much, don't bother to give me a name. Do you need one more slur in your language? Another way to blame one tribe for everything? As we both know, if you worship one God, you only need one enemy. I'm not the enemy, only a ruse to ignore what you see happening right here in this bed, a little paradigm of failure. One of your precious flowers dies here almost every day, and you can't rest until you attack the cause, meaning whatever is left, whatever happens to be sturdier than your personal passion. It was not meant to last forever in the real world, but why admit that when you can go on doing what you always do, mourning and laying blame, always the two together. I don't need your praise to survive. I was here first, before you were here, before you ever planted a garden. And I'll be here when only the sun and moon are left, and the sea and the wide field. I will constitute the field.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And if you wanted to just kind of give us like an introduction to the poem, and it's kind of as like the seed of inspiration for your curation.
Yeah, I mean, I always start with the artworks and the artists. So there's always in my mind, artworks that go together, artists that I think should meet. And, I was like watching, I've always loved Yasmin Abdullah's work, but I was watching Rose's work and I felt like the two would go so amazingly together. And I've been like looking for an opportunity, like a framework to put these two works together. And then Amy's knitted whorls and Taraneh's amazing biological, cosmological paintings. And somehow the poem and the artworks naturally came together. I put in, one of my works, the scythe, and Chris's sun worshippers, which are in the center, sort of, came in last, like literally like an hour before we put them there. So yeah, it sort of happens all together at the same time, or confusingly. But the poem, my friend 𝙒𝙗𝙏𝘾𝙃𝙂𝙀𝙀 had asked me to read something, a poem, a text, whatever, for an event she did at University of Michigan, which was going to be called Frequency of Grief. And it was about grief, mourning. You could read anything, it's a poem you wrote, anything you wanted. So I was sort of looking, and I selected this poem for that event. It was to find words for the grief I was feeling about Gaza, and not having the words, not having the smart things to say, or like any solution or thoughts. I was just trying to compile poetry that I felt like spoke to the emotions and could put words where I had a lack of words. And then the poem I also think is just really, it's not about Gaza, like 𝙒𝙗𝙏𝙀𝙀𝙀 died and like, I don't know, very recently actually. But I felt like it was touching to me that a weed, witchgrass, which is like a really beautiful weed actually, was the voice of the poem. And I thought it was beautiful on many levels and layers. And it said something I couldn't really say, so.
That's what art's for. I wanted to I know we could do, I want to do first like a little introduction of everyone's work, and if we could also go through and connect how our works resonate with Witchgrass as a poem. I think that would be a really great place to start. Can I start with Rose?
Sure. Yeah, so I have a few works in this show. This one behind me is working title, One Tissue. And then these fleshy, slimy ones over here, Tempered Touch and Forever Embryos. And I mean, I'm not sure about my works like direct infusing with the poem, but the poem itself, the mourning and laying blame at the same time, always simultaneously, it strikes my heart. And I guess maybe it speaks to our hypocrisy with our relationships with the earth, with materials. So I think that my work may touch on that a little bit. And I love the line that, I was existing, when I'll exist when only the sun and moon are left, I will constitute the field. I love the bold, like, I don't need you to live. And I feel like that's kind of our relationship with the earth lately. It's like, the earth will like collapse in and regenerate itself, and we can either be stewards in a symbiotic relationship with it, or we can fold into it when we have reached the extreme and the earth needs to reset its own cycles, and we will be effaced in that reset. So I mean, those are some things that I think about with materiality and my work, and fostering these relationships and using materials as a metaphor to foster these relationships. So yeah, I love the poem. It's a soul stirring poem, and when Daphne first shared it, I was just like, I was so honored to be like paired with that idea. I was just like, what? Okay. So yeah, so thank you for that. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm Yasmin Abdullah. I was also honored to be included in this concept, and when I read the poem, I also felt similarly. I was like, this gives words to something where so many people are speechless, and there really are no words to describe the inhumanity and the indignity. And someone that is Lebanese and Palestinian, it hits on a really deep level, and having family there, it's been horrific. But the work, these two pieces are new. They were made this year. This one in particular was for the show. This piece here is older, from 2019, and and then this piece here and that one there are my pieces, and they're all collected. They're gathered. They're remnants from a prior existence. They're stitched together painstakingly slow. It's about healing. It's about resilience. It's about resistance. It's about finding the silver lining when hope is gone and it feels futile. And that stubbornness is what keeps me going. It's what keeps my people going. And that is freedom. Wherever you can find that solitude and that drive to go on and to support and to show care and to resist occupation in any way, shape, or form, that is what humanity is all about. So the piecemeal thing, it's really just sort of trying to make sense of a senseless world and sort of just, thinking about this idea of what is empathy, and all of the scraps are man-made, one-use products that are used once for our convenience and destroyed. So finding them, parsing them together, and trying to elevate them, and think about giving them dignity is a stand-in for how we can be better humans. So that's about what my work's about.
I'm 𝙒𝙗𝙏𝙾𝙃𝙂𝙍𝙖𝙡𝙧, and I have only one painting in this amazing exhibition. When Daphne shared the poem with me, I very much connected with it. But it's selecting the work to add to the exhibition. I was thinking of which works talks more with textile artists. This was a very recent piece from past summer that I was like going through lots of transitions and moving. So I was trying to show have those movements in the work and the chaos and the masses going around it. And I think they work very well with Amy's work next to each other.
Beautiful, thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'm Amy, and to me, yeah, the poem. There's so many layers to the poem, but just the idea of resistance and resilience and creativity, kind of at all costs against the odds, like continuing to create. I did start knitting that piece, Silent Scar, shortly after October 7th, and so like the mood and the colors, and there's a lot of connections, and I think a lot about, you know, sort of just like the fabric that connects us all in the world, and so like we're one spot of the web, like if a stitch gets dropped and something opens up and it pulls on the other end that's over there. Those are just ideas that I'm thinking about a lot in terms of interconnection. So just connecting to what the way that Daphne connected the poem, and then also just like in the poem where it talks about the real world, and it's like, okay, so which world do we want to be the real world? And when I'm creating these pieces, one of my daughters called them portals, and so I'm thinking a lot about the conscious creation of different worlds, and
Which daughter?
you know what? I asked James that same question. I think it was my older daughter.
So awesome.
Mm-hmm. I know.
There's seats right here. There's also a bench.
So good to see you. Aw.
Do you want to sit?
Oh, no.
Okay, well, thank you. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad we have even more people joining our talk. We just kind of introduced all of the artists, and we connected their each individual works to Louise Gluck's poem "Witchgrass," and I wanted to kind of pivot just a bit and expand upon what we went through, which is to ask our artists, what questions are you asking through your artworks? What is it that you're like seeking that only creating something can answer? Whoever wants to begin is more than welcome to.
I'll say something. I'm always thinking about armor and adornment and a way to make.
I got it.
Go ahead.
This is a friend walker. Well, before this is
You know how to do it, totally just stack it.
just the candles to be good. All right, thank you so much again. Thank you to everyone standing, sitting here. Welcome. So the question to the artists that was just asked is, what questions are you asking through your art, and what answers can be uniquely, informed through the making process?
Yes, adornment and armor. Those are my interests. It's more about the sort of dovetailing or confusing boundaries between the two, and trying to make something delicate and that doesn't look like it could withstand any, impact, but that is quite has its own logic and its own reason for being. And I just, we'll call it armor. Like, it's not really gonna withstand much, but that's sort of my interest or my passion, or like the image or the idea that always comes back to me. And it seems to be sort of like just sort of like the first image that comes to me, the first thing I wanna create. That just seems to be randomly it.
And then we see that so well executed in this piece at the right, which is called Scythe.
Scythe.
Scythe, yeah. We can talk more about it, but I'm definitely interested into the use of materials because they challenge each other. And there is this like internal tension that's so well executed.
Yeah, the branch has this like beautiful curve, and so at first I was hammering in the pins, and then I realized I could be like way more careful with it because it's strong but not that strong. So I had to come up, like, making an artwork. It's like you look at a million problems to solve, and you never have the same problems to solve again. It's always a different problem, but I had to figure out ways of like drilling first and then slowly pushing in the pins, things like that. But yeah, I just wanted to marry the pins to that branch, and I was trying to figure out ways.
Excellent, so beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question because I feel like normally I'll work just like with my desire or obsessions as a compass, but I think if I were to find a common thread through the practice, through the questions, I think it's how do rituals change us, and then how do we change rituals, and inherent translation process that will happen, and an inherent like warping or loss that will happen in those practices as well. Like for this work, Tempered Touch, the ritual I was doing was, it actually felt a little violent. I was like staple gunning the pantyhose legs to a very large canvas, and I stretched them down and then staple gunned it to the bottom, and then I was marinating it in silicone, and I was thinking about how touch can both harm and heal us directly. Like they say, when you like come back to your people, you hug, you embrace for 20 plus seconds, and it calms your nervous system. So I was thinking about that duality, and it's funny because I was marinating it in silicone, like silicone caulk, and in order to do this touch, I also had to have a barrier on my hands with gloves in order to marinate it. But then, doing that ritual, I was like, if a big part of my process is reclaiming synthetic materials, am I just preserving it by putting another synthetic material upon this one? I'm transforming the material, but it's not an act of reclamation. So then that has changed my rituals into using more bioplastics as my marination instead of silicone, or different, infusing it with different materials, like this work, I've been infusing the nylon with indigo. So yeah, I think the short answer to that question is our relationship with rituals is the question that I'm investigating.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really about patience and relinquishing control to the materials, to the process. I don't start out with a sketch. I don't really start out with an idea. I feel the materials, I look at it, I just let them guide me, and that is a way of resetting and escaping the chaos in the world and recalibrating. And I think it also is a way for, self-healing, and also over time, tension, the, stitches and materials, a lot of them are synthetic and they're delicate and they're fragile, and I'm pushing them to their limits in a lot of cases. So So they're gonna change and they're gonna degrade like us. You know, there's an impermanence there, and it's just giving up that control and just sort of trying to be at peace with the natural order of things.
Well, for me, I don't think I'm like trying to answer anything outside of the pieces, and like I create, as Rose was saying too, out of like my own personal obsession with creating something. But for me, each work by itself is a question and a challenge that I get involved in, and I try to solve that and get to a conclusion, then like looking for something outside to get solved.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Like you create a problem for yourself.
Yes,
And
exactly.
then
And then
try
trying
to
to solve
solve
it,
it.
and then it gets worse. Then
Full
you give
life
up,
cycle.
you leave it for some time, and then again you go back to it.
Yeah, I don't know if for me it's much of a question, it's more of a seeking. And I think it's a lot of just kind of like growth, like seeking growth and what happens in the process of growth in terms of like ruptures and repairs, and like similar to Yasmin, like the delicacy of like some of the threads that I'm knitting with. I think like how far can I go for them to still hold together? Like how much can I mess with the structure? And then the structure, it's actually quite strong, even though it's so delicate. And so I think I'm like, it's playing more than anything with, you know, how much can it take, and then how can it still hold together after there's been a rupture. Yeah, and keep growing around that rupture, around that interference.
I see that. Something that has emerged as a theme, even as everyone here has described their works, is this kind of tension between, well, an emphasis on materials, and a tension between like synthetic and organic materials. It's obviously a really interesting metaphor, given the poem's thought about like the Earth's capacity to regenerate itself, a kind of like stubborn persistence as like a life form. So I was just curious if folks could describe that tension, how it plays out in their own work, and what material metaphors they're kind of invoking in their practice.
I didn't even really like notice that until you pointed that out. The interplay between the synthetic and the natural materials, and how they're being like married, or they're sort of grafting together. Yes. So many of the words have that. I didn't even like see it really, but I guess it's like our modern condition a little bit too. These are the materials that we have.
I think about that word grafting a lot. My favorite tree in Brooklyn is this one. It looks like a normal tree most of the year, but there's like 1 week in the spring where it's flowering with both white and pink flowers simultaneously. And then I was like, why? How does it have these 2 different colored flowers? And when I examined up close, like one of the branches had been grafted on of a different type of flowering tree, and that tree like accepted it as its own. So in my own work, I feel like I'm always trying to, you know, merge like an impossible wish and impossible relationship of like a symbiosis or becoming one. So I've been thinking about the synthetic and natural grafting a lot, and been thinking about the scientists that worked with the spinach leaf, noticing that it had like the same like vascular system as our human brain veins, and they were merging like human heart cells with it, and they got it to the point where the spinach leaf was beating. I learned this on Bill Nye. I was so thrilled. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, I mean, that fusing of like nature and human, it's like, that's proof that we're one being. That's proof that's like, the earth is like our larger body. So by trying to graft natural and synthetic, it's like this wish of us becoming one body too, and for the synthetic to not be poisonous to us, and for us to not be poisoning the earth, you know? So that's something I think about a lot. And even like prosthetics, like it's like, okay, this arm is made of metal, but like with it attached to the neurological system of our body, this metal arm will now function as part of the human body. So it's a wish that I think about a lot in my practice. So yeah, I love that question.
Yeah, I think it's two-part for me. Like on the first hand, growing up, I'm the first artist in my family, and so they never bought me art materials, so I had to work with what I had, which was scraps and fragments and things that were gonna be thrown out or recycled. And so extending that life, and no one understood what I was doing, and a lot of people to this day, they're like, it's trash. I'm like, no, it's not. So that is something that was just kind of born out of not having that, you know? And as I got older and I, you know, became much more cognizant of like what the planet is going through, and how much waste we produce, I felt like that is a small act of, you know, of activism, and it's not even a big thing, but it's just like I've continued that practice just as a mindful exercise, and you know, hopefully, you know, when I teach, that's something that I really encourage, you know, to think about like what do we use throughout the day, and how can we extend that, and how can we stop, you know, putting money into this capitalistic, you know, cycle. So yeah. That said, I always say like, don't buy me flowers because it hurts to think of something that's living cut down.
Yeah.
But if someone gives me flowers, I will weave them or stitch them into the work once they're dead. So that's another part of the practice, but it's like, yeah, I really don't want to use anything that is, you know, destroyed for art. You know, so that's something.
So in your practice, the organic is either it's held with such reverence that the inorganic, or perhaps like the detritus, is then elevated as central materials in your work.
Yes, you said it very well.
Very good.
For me, it's like I'm always like more getting attracted to natural elements, and try to like limit as much as like synthetic as I can. But even like trying to make my own paints from pigments that I like know the source of, but I still mix them with acrylic medium, which is synthetic, so I can't avoid that all the time. Yeah, I think it's more, the question is more relevant with others' work. And yeah, the pattern is organic, I think.
Yeah.
Try to limit use of synthetic material as much as I can, to use like glass jars instead of like plastic pallets, use the ceramic ones.
And it's not even to say I can see what you're saying. I definitely see organic as like an imagistic influence in your work. For example, do you draw from nature in terms of the imagery that you look at?
I don't like do sketchbooks and then like painting those, but I mean, even the sketchbooks and watercolors are by themselves. I mean, I might get inspired by the composition or like color palette, but it's not usually like directly transformed into a painting.
I thought it was really interesting how you're talking about too, like, you know, just even the containers that will hold the pigments that you're using, and thinking about all the materials in terms of like the tools that are part of the making, but that you don't see in the final work. I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting. It's like, what are all the like? What's the lifeline of invisible materials that you're not seeing? And what's hung up? Yeah.
It's like the alchemy backstage.
Yeah. Backstage. Huh? Yes. It sounds like a band or something. Yeah.
I'm mostly working with natural fibers. The one element in one of my pieces that's not natural is that there's like some copper thread, which is actually unwound from these pot scrubbers called 𝑘𝙬𝑗 that they're made out of like this copper thread, and the structure of them is actually knit, and then it's like glued together, so you can unravel them and get yarn. So I think like that's sort of an interesting material to like work with, because there's this whole unraveling of this like, you know, domestic, you know, labor type of thing, and then reworking it into into something new, which kind of goes along, which is like, for me, kind of knitting coming from this like natural lineage of like, you know, both of my grandmothers knit, my mom knits, but they knit in like a kind of rigid way that I'm not sure they really enjoy, and like it's not really creative. It's more of like, I have to do this thing. But yeah, it's something they know how to do in their hands. So like I think about that a lot when I knit. And so just the Chorboy, yeah, I think it's interesting. Even the name Chorboy.
That's such a funny name. I didn't even realize that was
That's
the
a brand
name.
name. It's like a TM.
Hilarious.
The next question that I wanted to pose to the group was, this is such a wonderful exhibition. Your works are obviously curated and in dialogue with each other. I was just curious if there's anything that you learned about your own work through the exhibition, through, you know, the reception that you received, and maybe even some connections that you've drawn between your practice and other folks in the show.
That was such a good question. I'll let someone else answer.
Oh yes, that's true.
I mean, sorry, go ahead. Daphne, when Daphne's curating, she has kind of like nicknames for all the art, which I think is like just so adorable. And like the nickname for this one was Glistening People. And it made me see it in such a lighter connotation, because like my thought process was like, oh yeah, I marinated like synthetic and synthetic, so it was like a lot more darker. I think my original title had something to do with like our accumulation of consumption or something, and then I was like, oh, Glistening People, that's so much more magical, and it actually had me like retitle the work for the show, because she saw it through such a more like elegant light that was a lot more living than I had thought with my own associations with the material. So yeah, I like Daphne's nicknames for all the art.
I shouldn't really do that. But
No, it's cute. It's like it feels like another level of intimacy. Like when someone has a nickname for you, you're like, oh, like we feel like close now. Like we have like a little secret, you know. So I thought it was adorable.
I do see it as like emotional, kind of personified connection. I saw it as connecting and plant-like.
I'm curious to know if
Yeah. What's her nicknames?
I don't know. I actually love the titles, you know, and especially Yasmin's titles are like so beautiful. The list of artworks is outside on the table, so if anyone wants to look at them, they feel like small poems to me. And I also love what you said, you know, in our talk earlier about these are single-use plastics, a lot of them meant for our convenience. Really, you know, we expect it to be thrown away after one use. Like there's a dryer sheet here, there's a little light blue plastic fork in there. There's, you know, little objects like this, and I think you're surprising them with infinity. Like that's what comes to my heart when I look at them. Like they didn't expect to be treated like this, you know. But you're seeing their beauty, and yeah.
I think the titles are, I think that they're deserving of a good name, so they are like little poems, and I think that that's part of like the idea of like honoring, bestowing honor. And what I found really cool was how like you selected Amy's portals, because these were also, I was thinking of them as portals, and they're like these two opposing portals, and I'm like, what would that be like to jump between them? Can we alter the course of civilization and reality? Like what can artists do? Like that's such a cool conversation that we, you know, and I guess just thinking about the dexterity, and I guess your painting definitely speaks to that, right? Like all of the painstaking line work, they feel like stitches. And so there's something really beautiful, and it feels very celestial or otherworldly, and like it's chaotic, but it's hypnotic at the same time, where I'm like along for the ride and I'm all in. And so there is this sort of like time traveling feeling that I get here, and like the suspension with these pieces, this idea of like defying gravity, or I don't know, it's nice to kind of just imagine and dream and think about what's possible. And then like the delicate pins here that we're seeing, and like with Chris's, with the candles, there's this layer of like, that's persistence, right? As time like ceases, right? We're running against time. When those candles go down, what happens? There's a change. There's the energy field shifts or something. And this idea of like painstaking labor, and this idea of drilling holes and seeing what's possible. So things that are growth, maybe they're, we think of growths like tumors, like it's a bad thing, but there's also the growth of nature and how that's something that's anew or afresh. And, what does that mean? And where do we exist within all of that?
I will say for Chris, he's been collecting, plastic bottles and objects, basically what other people would call detritus or trash from the coastlines of NYC for like 20 years now. And these new sculptures, we were kind of joking that we're sort of turning into each other, because he's like digging into my beads, fire beads, and these three little sculptures, we're sort of like loosely titling them sun worshippers, because they seem to be striving. They're like little creatures that are striving towards Taraneh's painting and Amy's, whorls, portals, oak tree rings, mushroom growths. They seem to be desiring and striving, and they've sort of had a little beginning to their life here. So.
And for me, they're like, if they were like dancing and moving and like pulling out like spores, that would have been like my painting. You could look at them from the top.
Either the organisms that were born out of
Yeah,
this, like they
so something's like they go in the round and something's coming off. And
Yeah. It's alchemy.
yes.
Amy, did you want to share as well?
I just feel a lot of like gratitude and just to get to see the interplay and to see how all these pieces are communicating. And when we got to talk the other day and hear everyone's and like all of the connections among it, it's just, I just feel a lot of gratitude that my pieces get to play and be in this space and communicate with the other ones. So, yeah.
Wonderful. I think as a final question, because this is probably a room full of artists, it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of hear what our artistic lineage, our creative genealogy, to the extent that we feel connected to other artists that are even beyond this room. So if folks wanted to share perhaps either themes, I'll do it this way, like themes and movements that they feel connected to, or artists in particular that feel like kin to them. I think everyone would love to also be a part, to hear those connections as well.
Yes, I mean there's so many artists that I admire, but probably what I would mention is 2 movies, in fact, and a book. I'll mention that. For my piece, I was thinking, I saw in 2020, I saw that movie Annihilation with Natalie Portman, and there was like this branch that had a grafting of all these different species of flowers on it, and the art direction in that movie was insane, and it really reminded me of Stalker, Tarkovsky's Stalker, from like the 70s. It's about a team. They go into a liminal zone, a space that's sort of a space they have to figure out the rules, and things are sort of bendy and flexy and unusual. But that branch just struck me like visually, and I just had wanted to create something like that, a branch where all these different flowers are, thriving together. And then about about them as like sun worshippers. I remembered maybe one reason why I suggested the title Sun Worshippers to Chris was a book by 𝙍𝙗𝙏𝘾𝙃𝙂𝙍𝙏 called I think Clara and the Sun or something. But it's about like these humanoids, robots that live with children. It's like a sort of a futuristic whatever, but this robot Clara starts to have religious and spiritual feelings for the sun because she's like, solar charged. And it's so beautiful, it's so touching, and you feel so much empathy for this robot. It's so beautiful. And it was like, it's not even that new, it's probably maybe like 5 or 6 or more years ago. But yeah, I think of these objects, none of which are natural. Like there's like glass, cupping glasses, there's plastic bottles stuck to each other and melted together. Oh, there's like some gems, plastic protrusions from some sort of manufacturing, glass beads, but they seem to have like been breathed life in Chris's hands. So they seem to have spirituality to me.
I totally see that. I think the framing of this question was interesting how you asked it this time, because originally I was thinking, like artists that are inspiring, but when you're saying like genealogy and lineage, I was thinking of my great grandmother whose name is Rose, and as well, and I never met her, but I've heard some funny stories about her, and one of the stories I think about is when her husband would bring in a Christmas tree, he would always think it was like too big or like didn't fit, and he would like cut all the branches to make it like more shorter or compact, and he would throw them outside, and then she would like get my grandma, and they would go sneak outside, they would take the branches, bring them back in the house, and then she would tie them all back onto the Christmas tree. And I just thought that was such a hilarious story, like this like act of repair that it's not really gonna repair, but is like the wish there. So I think about that a lot in the way that I work with these like impossible wishes and doing a ritual, even just with the like charging the sentiment of it. But yeah, I'd say that she's an inspiration to me. And in terms of artists, I really adore Junie and Antony, and thinking about how her work is so process oriented, like with her Gnaw series where she's like biting, or like with the mopping the gallery floor with her hair, how like it's like all process oriented, and how that changes the evolution of the work, I think is really interesting. So yeah.
I love your stories so much.
Yeah, I think also like to think about like genealogies, like a big part of my practice, this is all textile, but as an interdisciplinary artist, like I do a lot of work with different communities, and the stories, I feel like honored when stories are shared with me, and so a lot of these pieces sometimes are created from those conversations. So the conversations, that trust, thinking about how to pay a tribute to people, is a part of that. So I would say like a lot of it comes from the social engagement and those intimate connections that I feel really like honored to have and to hold them, and what do I do with them. So that's, I think, like where I would go.
Like a literal social network.
I guess so, yeah, but it's intimate, like there's this trust that's built, and I think that that's really personal, because when we're in the studio, that is a really personal experience, and it's lonely, and it's cathartic, and it's all these amazing emotions, so, yeah.
So lovely, thank you.
For me, besides all the artists that influenced me, as a child, my grandfather was a carpet designer, and like growing up in his studio and like learning how to make like knots and like dyeing the wool and all that has a big effect in my life and work. And as you can see, all the details and repetitive work has been there more recently, more than ever. But also thinking about artists that I admire a lot. Talked about 𝙒𝙗𝙙𝙖𝙀𝙀 the other day, and the way he looks at nature, and he gets inspired by nature. There was a video on YouTube about him that he's like walking in the woods, I'll say, and like the way he was like describing the algae, and there was like a pest thing on a tree that was looking like there were moth. It was like definitely something bad, but how he was seeing the beauty in that form and how he translates and transforms it into abstract forms in his painting, is always really inspiring to see how he translates those.
Well, I guess I want to thank 𝘾𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, who is like a main fiber artist who I got the chance to work with at Haystack a number of years ago, pretty shortly before she died, and I feel really grateful to her as a teacher of someone who showed me like an artist who used knitting as her language and her technology, and I think that opened up a lot for me. And then, I mean, but I think like, you know, I'm a social worker and I'm a breath worker and I'm a mother, and so I think that like the lineage of my work, you know, I was talking before about how there's like this embodiment in it, and I don't necessarily know all the details behind that, but I know that they're there. And I think in terms of just like the other roles that I play in my life, a lot of what is constantly on my mind is about like what's moving forwards and backwards in terms of our lineage and nervous system stuff and how the interconnection, and so those are just like things that are informing what I'm doing.
Wonderful. This has been such an amazing, enlightening conversation. I want to thank everyone for coming and being a part of this, for making meaning in real time, coming to understand the works and understand the artists themselves. If you want to stick around and join us, we're happy to chat with everyone, and thank you again.
But I elbowed the painting accident.